We're delighted to welcome the best-selling author Tim Marshall. Tim has had a distinguished 30-year career in news reporting and presenting, most recently as diplomatic editor for Sky News and previously working for the BBC. A leading authority on foreign affairs, Tim has reported from 40 countries and covered many conflicts firsthand, including the Balkan Wars of the 1990s and the more recent uprisings in the Arab world. As well as his writing, Tim regularly appears on Sky News and the BBC, as well as editing the podcast, The What and the Why. He is also the father of 2 Latimerians. This evening, Tim will be discussing The Power of Geography, 10 Maps that Reveal the Future of Our World, his much anticipated sequel to the Sunday Times and New York Times bestseller, Prisoners of Geography. In The Power of Geography, which will be published next month, and in this talk, Tim will explore the regions that are set to shape global politics in a new age of great power rivalry. He will also touch on the themes explored in his book, Divided: Why We're Living in an Age of Walls. Many of you will know that these talks raise money for our bursaries appeal. Your donations made when you booked this talk have made a real difference to our fundraising. Now, before I hand over to Tim, a bit of housekeeping. Please do write any questions you may have in the chat facility to the right of your screens so Tim can address these both during and after his talk. And we'd ask you to keep yourselves muted until we start the Q&A session so that we can all hear clearly. Now, without further ado, Tim, over to you.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Good evening. Thanks very much for giving up your time. Well, it's going to be a fun-packed hour of death, conflict, misery. So I need to say before we really kick off that, in fact, there's never been a better time to be alive. Trust me, COVID notwithstanding, never been a better time to be alive. Keep that in mind as we go through this veil of tears. There is the next 40 minutes. I say veil of tears because we're going to deal with a lot of difficult stuff. But I also say it's never been a better time to be alive, because if you look at things like death in childbirth, rates of education around the world, everything is becoming more positive, diseases being eradicated, etc., etc. So keep that in mind, and off we go. What an amazing world we live in. Sorry, those are the book that's coming out. Take a look at the world map. And I don't know if you're like me, when I was younger, I had a wanderlust, and I've been lucky enough to go to about 60 or 70 of those countries. And when I was growing up, and when I was visiting a lot of them, when there were places in the world such as East Germany and Czechoslovakia, which no longer exist, that was a bipolar world. In the bipolar world, it was pretty easy. You knew where you were. And many of the things that happened in the world, the big conflicts, were through that prism. Communism fell in 1989 with the Berlin Wall. We entered a unipolar world, a brief moment in human history when there was one global superpower, and only one, and no one could challenge them. The French call it the hyperpuissance, the hyperpower. Now I'm arguing we're in a multipolar world. American power has diminished. The power of places such as the European Union, the BRICS there on the far right, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, they're rising. And in a multipolar world, that means you've got an awful lot of people jostling for position. And with the lack of a world policeman, for right or wrong, I try not to take sides. But if you haven't got a policeman, people tend to take the law into their own hands. Turkey's a particularly good example because you don't have the discipline of the two sides. And I think that partially explains why we're in a pretty difficult time. There's a whole bunch of other reasons, and it's also why we're in quite a divided time. If we go to the next slide, but don't yet play it. Since 2008, what has happened is a whole bunch of things that have all come together. We had the 2008 financial crash. Money ran out, became a lot more difficult for a lot of people. Technology has accelerated. And in that technology, everybody in the world can see how everybody else in the world lives. And a lot of people are thinking, I'd rather live like that. And you can't really blame them. Also, technology is doing away with people's jobs. Globalization has also done away with people's jobs. So it's a particularly difficult time. COVID has played into that. And they've made us more divided. You may not know, but a lot of you may have heard about the flat Earth. I don't seriously mean the flat Earth people. I mean that the world is flat now, that globalization has flattened it. I don't believe that. And one of the reasons is that there are now 63 countries that wall or fence themselves off from each other. That's a third of all the countries in the world. So it's a very divided time. And I think it's because of the reasons I've just said. And it's also because of migration. If we play this video, each orange dot is 17 people, either refugees and or migrants. And if you look at the direction of travel, it is mostly, but not all, from the south to the north, from the less well-off south to the better off north. Look at Latin America there. Where? We're talking places like Venezuela and Colombia, areas of conflict and poverty. Africa, Central African republics. To the left, the Côte d'Ivoire, the Middle East, areas of deprivation, areas where global warming is having a huge impact. And that is what is driving a lot of this movement, which is in turn causing tensions in the countries. You'll see an aberration going left to right in a moment. That's the Ukraine conflict with Russia, where 400,000 Ukrainians fled, Ukrainian Russian speakers fled into Russia. Should be coming up next year. Here it goes. Boom, 400,000 people. So these are the things that are driving this conflict in this multipolar world. I would argue, if we go to the next map, that a nation, I'm afraid, tends to look out for itself. And Russia is no different, and why would it be? And the way I approach things is through a multi-lensed lens, if you like. But my starting point is geography, because a nation's story starts from where it is, starts from how far is it to the sea? Where does that sea lead us? Where are the mountains that may protect us or cut us off from people? Where do our rivers lead us, etc., etc.? That is the starting point to understand a country, the geography. You then layer on history, you then layer on politics. And Russia is my best example. Russia took a real hit in '89. It lost its empire, the USSR. It caved in economically, and it was at its weakest for a century. Look at this map. Look at the top, it's cold. Oh, previous map. Sorry, Charlotte. Thank you. Very good. It's cold up there. Some of the ports freeze for some of the year. In the Arctic Circle, there's ice packs. They feel trapped. If you look at the Caspian Sea towards the bottom of the map and the Black Sea, well, they're internal. They're like lakes. You still haven't got access to the sea. Second thing about this map, if you look at the Ural Mountains, it's in just the first third. From the Ural Mountains, looking left, all the way to France is flatland. Who likes flatland? Apart from farmers, the military, tanks, cavalry. So all the way from France, right up to the Ural Mountains. And in front of Moscow, it's flat. There's one barrier, and it's called the Carpathian Mountains. You see it there just below Poland. So between the Baltic Sea and the Carpathian Mountains is Poland. That is the narrowest point of the flat North European plain. And through that gap has come, in the past 250 years, the Poles towards Russia, the Swedish Empire towards Russia, the Lithuanian Empire, yes, there was one, towards Russia, Napoleon in 1812, the Germans in 1914, and the Germans in 1941. Think what that does to the Russian psyche. They've been invaded about once every 40 years for the past 300 years through that gap. After the Second World War, which they won, what do? They plug that gap. They occupy all the territory in front of them. After 1989, they lose the plug. the Poles and the rest of them think, I don't want to be part of the Russian system. They join the Western system. So that gap's now open. Now, I'm not arguing for a moment that anybody wants to invade Russia. You'd be stupid to do so. Look at Hitler in 1941 in the winter. That was a bad move. But if you're Russian and you're looking outwards from Moscow with that history layered on to the politics and layered on to the geography, what are you going to do? You're going to seek to plug that gap. And this is why Russia seeks to dominate the land in front of it, Ukraine, Belarus, which it does control. And it would love to control the Baltic states and even Poland. And that's why history never finishes, because the Russians are still trying to do that. And the West is still trying to pull those countries into its sphere of influence. And those countries mostly make a choice. And they look east and they look west. And most of them are still looking west. Again, I'm asking you to look at things from the Russian perspective, though. That's why they behave the way they do. Look at a closer map of Russia. Remember, they had no warm water port because it's cold up there. The one warm water port isn't really theirs. It was in Crimea, which was part of Ukraine, which they lost when the communism fell. And the Ukraine, 4 or 5 years ago, flipped into the Western sphere of influence. They decided they want to go with the democracies. What did Russia do? It invaded Crimea. Why? Because it needs that port. It needs that port. It's the only warm water port it has. That explains their behavior in this multipolar world where things are clashing and they're trying to get back to a position they used to be in. And if we look at that from a wider perspective, from Europe, in Russia's place in Europe, it comes into focus. Remember that it's cold at the top. So the Russian ships can't always get out. If they want to, they've got to come all the way around through what's called the GI-UK gap. Greenland, Iceland, UK. GI-UK gap. Well, that's where NATO's military navies sit and wait in case of conflict. There isn't one, thank God. Okay, they could always come out of the Baltic. Well, they used to, but Estonia used to be part of the Soviet Union. Latvia, Lithuania, Poland was in the Warsaw Pact, etc. Now, all those countries are in NATO. Half of them are in the EU. Difficult to get out. Look at that little narrow gap at the Skagerrak Strait in Denmark. All right, they can come out the Black Sea, the port, Crimea. Except they've got to come through the Bosphorus Strait there, where between Turkey and Bulgaria. It's only a mile wide. Who controls it? Turkey. Which organization is Turkey in? NATO. Once you're there, through the Aegean, Greece, major NATO naval power. Out past Italy, ditto, France, Spain, Portugal. See the Gibraltar there at the tip of Spain? British naval base. So if you put yourself in Russia's head, you understand their psyche. And you understand why they were not prepared to accept the fait accompli, if you like, of 1989 and the loss of their great power. And it's why they've been pushing back ever since in the multipolar world. And they've done a pretty good job of it from their perspective. So that's how I try and frame things to understand a nation's behavior and a nation's history, and also to make forecasts about what will happen. You really can do that. I can forecast confidently that Russia will always seek to control Belarus, that Russia will not accept that Ukraine is now looks towards the West and will engineer as much as it can to get a pro-Russian government in there. And there's ways and means of doing that. And I'll further forecast that they will try to upset Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Estonia, for example, has 50% Russian speakers, and they will use them to try to flip Estonia back to their sphere of influence. These are things that you can forecast through a knowledge of what the map is telling you, and then the history and the politics. You can do it with UK. That's our classic view. The real divide is not north-south, and I speak as someone from Yorkshire. It's actually east-west. If you look at the terrain of the UK, the UK, yeah, the mountainous side is mostly, not entirely, on the left-hand side of that map, east. Sorry, west. That's west on the left. And if you're interested and you're a geek like me, get out a map of what the Romans conquered. And it's pretty much that line from Bristol up to Newcastle. And that is the lower ground. And the higher ground, Wales, bits above United, and Scotland, they didn't conquer. Then get out a map of the Danelaw, and the Vikings took control 1,000 years later. It's almost the same. That's the real divide in the UK. The best farmland down in the south, in the flatland, etc., etc. So a nation's story starts from where it is and what it's got, what it can do, not what it wants to do. Let's flip the UK on its side. This is a fascinating perspective, I think, if indeed we have such a map. Maybe we don't. Yes, we do. I love that map. Doesn't that make you see Britain's position perhaps differently? That's what we are facing. Now, I'm not making political points about Brexit, for or against. What I would say is there is a great trading partner. Look at all those rich countries. If you can get the political relationship right, the geography is tailor-made for you. Got something else. Trade routes. 90% of the world's trade moves by water. If you're Switzerland, bit of a problem. If you want to dominate the world with a huge navy, another problem. If you want to get out there into the sea lanes, look where the UK is. It's in a fantastic position. Until not so long ago, if you wanted to build a navy, what did you need? Steel was no good, it would have sunk. Wood. You needed wood. A nation's story starts from what it has. What does the UK have? A shed load of trees, specifically oak trees. Oak is stronger than many other woods, therefore it's better able to withstand cannonballs. It's better able to withstand crashes because they used to crash their ships into each other. Great fun. So that's one of the reasons the UK was able to rise to the position it did. Egypt, not so many trees, not such a big navy. What else have we got when we move from wind power and we move to rather dirty energy? We've got a lot of this, loads of it, in fact. Again, brilliantly positioned to take advantage of what we had. Until the Act of Union 1707, the UK was very, very concerned about two things, well, many things. Sorry, England, I should say, before it became the UK. England. It was constantly warring with France. It was constantly warring with Scotland. Scotland and France usually were allies. And the English had this real fear that France would invade England via Scotland through the back door. Well, the Act of Union 1707 shut the back door, made us able not to look that way and in fact to look elsewhere, and is one of the keys to the rise to power. Sorry, right, so move on all the way to our submarines, and I'll say why they've now come in. Brexit may lead to Scotland leaving the UK. I think there will be a second referendum. How it goes is another matter. Supposing Scotland was to leave, I'm not suggesting that the back door is now unlocked for France to invade England. I really don't think that's the case, nor do I think Scotland will. But the British nuclear deterrent, we've got 4 of these Vanguard-class nuclear subs, not talking about the rights and wrongs of it, they just are. Where are they based? They're based in Scotland. They're based at Faslane, and they're mended in Coulson, just up the road from Faslane in Scotland. So the Scottish government is adamant if it achieves independence, it will be nuclear free. So where are we going to park those? We don't have a base for them. The rump UK would not have a nuclear deterrent at that point, which is problematic for the defence chiefs. Again, you might think it's a good thing. You might think it's a bad thing. I try not to get into rights and wrongs too much because it gets in the way of understanding things. I'm not saying you shouldn't have morality, but it does get in the way. And in this world, seconds count. Every single day, a Russian bomber, sometimes more than one, heads towards the UK from Russia and tests the UK's air defences. And every single day, the UK fast jets set off from places like Lossiemouth and go up to meet the Russian bombers. And the Russian bombers, fighter jets, stop just before they get to UK airspace, and the two of them shadow each other along, and we have a picture of them doing just that. This happens, I think, pretty much every day. Well, seconds count, and we would be seconds behind. So it's an interesting thing in this multipolar world where we're all jostling for position. It's another reason why the UK is going to continue to stick very close to the Americans, because they are betting that American power will not diminish to the extent that other people are betting it will, primarily the Chinese. As I say, you can do it with any country. Let's look at Greece and Turkey. Perhaps not in quite so much detail. I could do an hour just on this map, but you'd all switch off. Look at the back of Greece, big mountain range, rubbish for trading. I mean, you want to trade into Albania? No. North Macedonia? Well, there's a couple of gaps there, but not really. This is why Greece has always looked to the sea, always had to be a naval power. If it had had flat land to its north to trade, it might have not bothered to become this. It is a great naval power, spends 7% of its GDP on defense, most of it on the Navy. But look at that dotted line. Under international law, EEZs, exclusive economic zones, you have 200 miles from your coastline. So take Lesbos right there in the middle. So 200 miles looking one way is all yours. And if it's less than 200 miles to your neighbor's frontier, you share it. If you're Turkish, does that look equitable? No, it doesn't. Fine if you're Greek. Greece, those are Greek islands. Consequently, the Aegean is a Greek lake. Turkey is not happy about that. Switch to a closer map of Turkey. You do the same things. At the back of it, mountains, you've locked the door. The high plain, the Anatolian plain, high ground, very sparsely populated. Imagine trying to invade Turkey. You've got to get over that mountain range, which if you've got troops there already, very hard to invade. You then got to go hundreds of miles across that very bleak terrain at the top until you get to something worth conquering, which is Istanbul and the Sea of Marmara region. That's the center of gravity for Turkey, and it's very, very well protected, especially once you have a navy protecting the Bosphorus Strait. But again, look at that EEZ on the left-hand side. Is Turkey going to accept that, especially in a multipolar world? Is Greece in NATO and Turkey in NATO? Yes. Does that matter when you haven't got the discipline of a bipolar world? Not so much. Look at Turkey and the Ottoman Empire. Almost the same thing. Only 100 years ago, Turkey lost the Ottoman Empire. That was its extent at its height. Look at all that lovely territory. And look at Turkey's borders now. They're in the middle. Turkey's not happy about that. And it has something called a blue homeland theory. Shortly after it lost the Ottoman Empire in the early 1920s, 100 years is nothing in the historical memory. If you look at the next map, you'll see its concept of what it should control. That's the shaded area. Now, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even in the 90s, it couldn't really flex its muscles and push out again because it was a NATO member. So is Cyprus, so is Greece. You can't start bossing them around. But when you go into a multipolar area, when the Americans' attention is elsewhere, you get a situation where they have almost come to blows with Greece last year. They almost came to blows with France last year. One of their ships locked its targeting systems onto a French ship, both in NATO. This was to do with Libya. So in this multipolar world, you find Turkey pushing back out into its former empire. And it's currently fighting in Libya, it's fighting in Syria, and it's fighting in Iraq. And it intends to achieve that blue homeland one way or another. And it's a dangerous flashpoint in Europe. Probably won't come to it, but it could do. Okay, Iran briefly. It's a bit like Russia. Don't invade it. It's a very bad idea, especially in winter, very cold. Look at those mountains. So let's say you want to invade it from Iraq. You come across that plain. You hit a mountain. All right, we'll do it from Turkey. Oh, another mountain. Let's come in from the sea at the top. Nope. You get about 10 miles inland, another mountain. Supposing you did get in, that middle bit the Iranian plateau, is salt marshes, most of it. And I wrote in the new book, Power of Geography, that you can sink. I've driven across some of these salt deserts. One of the stupidest way to die, I would have thought, would be to drown in a desert. But if you go off the beaten track, off the roads, you can sink into these mud flats more than 6 feet over your head. That is a silly way to go, drowning in a desert. So basically, don't invade Iran. It's just not a good idea. So that explains Iran's strength and why in recent decades it has been a secure place. It also wishes to dominate its region against the Arabs. They are Iranian and Farsi Persian speakers. 50% of them are Farsi. And they've had historical issues with the Arabs. What the Americans did when they invaded Iraq and overthrew a Sunni-dominated regime was to deliver a Shia-dominated regime in Iraq. Now, the Shia government are friendly and sympathetic to the Iranian government because that is 95% Shia in Iran. So the Americans inadvertently delivered to the Iranians, to the Persians, their 2,000-year historical dream of safeguarding their western flank. Once safeguarded, they've been pushing out, well, they've been pushing out for years. Look at the next map of the Middle East. Now, there's more to it than just who's Shia and who's Sunni. There's nation-state power. Nevertheless, in Iran, in Tehran, Shia-dominated government. In Iraq now, in Baghdad, a Shia-dominated government. And Iran is projecting its power through sympathetic people. In Syria, the reason it got involved in the Syrian civil war is that the Syrian leadership are Alawites, which is an offshoot of Shia. This is President Assad in Damascus. The final bit of that jigsaw, to the left, is Lebanon. The south of Beirut and the south of Lebanon is dominated by Hezbollah, which is a Shia militia. So Iran has got this corridor to the Mediterranean Sea, and it intends to keep it open one way or another. Australia. Again, my line is, what is it? Australia was a long way from anywhere that became somewhere. How did that happen? Well, that's history and politics, but look where it is. I mean, I think it's 12,000 kilometers to the left before you get Africa. It's 13,000 kilometers to the right before you hit Latin America. 5,000 kilometers down to Greenland. Its next door neighbors that they almost can wave at, New Zealand, are only 2,000 kilometers away, which leads you to the north and leads you to the only thing that they are rather nervous about, because above that buffer in front of them is China. We'll come back to that. Look at Australia a little more closely. See how close it is to Papua New Guinea. Well, the Japanese invaded Papua New Guinea in the Second World War, and then they bombed Darwin, which caused some alarm to the Australians, as it would. And Australia has a problem. There's no water there. You look to the far right, see where the mountains are, Brisbane, Sydney, Australia, Melbourne. Well, that's where most of the population lives, because in the middle, there's no water, and if there's no water, you can't live. What the early Australians, settlers, colonialists, were hoping for was the same as America. They got in America, you land on the East Coast, go over the Appalachian Mountains. What is before you? The Mississippi River Basin, the biggest farmland in the world, with the Great River System. They thought, great, we'll have some of that. They got over the mountains here near Brisbane, and it was desert pretty much all the way to Perth, which is why their population is really limited. America has grown to 380 million. Well, 100 years ago, Griffith Taylor, a man and a horse, was the first geography professor at Sydney University. And he said, this country cannot sustain, by the year 2000, more than 20 million people. And he was castigated because they wanted a different narrative. And he said, well, you can't. And in 2000, it was about, I think, about 22 million. I think it's now about 25 million. And why? Look at the river system in Australia. That's it. It's pretty much, that's it. The rest of it, the other 2,000 miles, not so many rivers. Can't live. And even this is a very limited river system. Many of them don't flow for the whole year round. So look at where the rivers are, and now look at where people live from a satellite at night where the electricity is on. Same thing. That explains a lot about Australia. Also explains Australia's defence policy. What are you going to protect? That little white dot in the middle, not so much. No, you know what you're going to protect there. So you need a navy. Look at the size of the place. It's a continent. You can't really have loads of ships patrolling it all the time. So where are you going to patrol? Right-hand side. Still haven't got a big enough navy, especially if you've got a big power against you. Let's say Japan. So who are you going to call? Not the UK. Prime Minister John Curtin in 1940-41. Lovely cartoon of him with a kangaroo behind him. Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. He said that without any inhibitions, I'll make it quite clear that Australia looks to America. He basically said, we know Britain's at war. We know they're not going to come to our aid. Right, our best friends now, America. And well, you would, wouldn't you? And to this day, they are with the Americans, because in 41, it was the Japanese threatening to land. UK was far away. America could help. Now, their big rival is China. And America realizes that if it wants to keep its dominance in the Pacific, it better have some friends. And Australia is one of those friends. So move quickly to China. Sorry, Australia's, I beg your pardon. Just, yeah, go back one. This is why the Americans have forged something called the Quad, which is coming into fashion. The Quad is Australia, India, Japan, United States. And they're trying to box in China because they know China's rising. They know there's going to be a new Cold War of sorts. And America knows it needs friends. India feels threatened by China. So does Japan. So does Australia. And they need friends. So it's a marriage of convenience. And these four have got together. But look at it from China's perspective. China feels quite safe, mostly. See, just above China is, well, it's part of China now, Mongolia. Well, they took Inner Mongolia and colonized it. They took Manchuria and colonized it. They took Xinjiang, the Muslim Uyghur area, and colonized it. It used to be 50% Muslim. Now it's 50% Han Chinese, 50% Uyghur. They took Tibet. That's more or less 50-50 now. So they're very well protected by this buffer zone, except for one area, and that's the coast, which is why they intend to dominate the coast and push out. But look at pushing out from the Chinese perspective. What they see in front of them is a wall. And they know they need to break through that wall. But who's in that wall? Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, Indonesia, all American allies, boxing them in from the great sea lanes of the world. And these countries all have choices in this interim period. Who are they going to go with? Are they going to go with the Americans? They're going to go with the Chinese, or are they going to try and stay out of it, which is very, very difficult to do. We've made our decision today. If you've seen the Strategic Defence Review, which has come out, and the fact that UK is sending an aircraft carrier to the South China Sea in a couple of months. Interesting move. So from the Chinese perspective, you can see why they would wish to push out. You can see why they would like to flip these countries, because then they would feel much more secure. Right, finally, let's look upwards. Let's look to the stars. These are the countries which have space capabilities, launch capabilities. The UAE sent a probe to Mars last month. It wasn't just the Americans. So it's a very limited number of countries. And the thing about space I want to get across is the geography of it and how it's our next area of competition. And to do that, look at the choke points on Earth. These are the world's trade choke points, places like the Malacca Straits. If we move on one slide, yeah, there you go. Malacca Straits, Strait of Hormuz, Panama Canal, Suez Canal. If you can control what are called pinch points, you can control the movement of goods. Remember I said that 90% of the world's goods move by water. Well, it's the same in space. You look at the map of the orbits of Earth. Low Earth orbit is where most, and mid-Earth, where most of the satellites are. Supposing you were in a position to control all of the satellites, you would then control all of the visuals about what was going on the ground, who was moving what, where, ships, troops, missiles, which is why it's going to be an area of huge competition. If that's going to be the case, you better defend your satellite because somebody might try to hit it. And last year, the Chinese launched a satellite, then they launched another satellite, and then they fired a projectile from one satellite to the other. They tested a weapon in space, first time it's ever happened. I'm going to see more of that. Because if you can dominate that, and you can dominate this, these are the libration points. These are the points where if you have a spacecraft, you don't have to have any rockets, it doesn't move. L2 is where the Chinese are positioning something because they want to have a colony on the far side of the moon. Briefly, let's go back to the previous map. The other thing about the first two orbits is that in a few years' time, once we've escaped the Earth's atmosphere, we'll be refueling spacecraft in those two orbits. It takes more energy to get just to there than from there all the way to Mars, which is millions of miles. So again, if you control that orbit, you control the choke points about who can escape the Earth. And that's why this is a coming area, hopefully of cooperation, possibly of competition. I've got a quote for you, two slides on, there we go. So there's a new branch of geopolitics called Astropolitics, and it's the same concepts but put up there. And if you can control all these things, you control everything. Moving on to brighter things, that's Earthrise. That's the first photograph taken from space, from the moon of Earth. It had a huge impact on the ecological movement, on the green movement, when we realized we really were what Carl Sagan called a pale blue dot hanging there. And it had given us a sense of oneness. And I cling to the sense of oneness, that we can cooperate because we are all one. And all that nonsense I've been going on about for the past 40 minutes is actually history, because we're getting better all the time, as indeed we are, as I said at the beginning. So moving on to almost the last slide. I'm hoping that, this little plaque is on a spaceship, ship even, called Voyager. It's heading out to, well, we don't really know where. We've lost it. It's so far gone, it's out. But this is supposed to tell the aliens, hi, we're over here. See the starburst? Follow the long line to the bottom. That's how to get back to us. You see here representations of some types of humans, and you can clearly see that consequently, they can clearly move their digits, these people, because one's waving. We think we've shown them the internationally recognized symbol of, hi, greetings. I worry that that might be the intergalactical recognized sign of, we've come to kill you, which would give us a bit of a problem. But as it's going to be 20,000 years before it reaches the next star, it'll be fine. Now we really are moving on to the next slide, and this is the good news. Not the end of the world, end of the talk. Moving on to the penultimate slide, I believe. Isn't it lovely? That's where we're going. And I'll leave you with another optimistic thing. There we go. Human ingenuity will save us, always has done. It's why we're getting jabs in our arms at the moment. It's why when you go to the dentist, it's not as bad as it was in the Elizabethan age. You want to be Queen Elizabeth? Then she had terrible toothache all her life, made her life hell. Or you want to be just Joe Schmo now, go to the dentist, get it sorted. I'd much rather not be Queen then and be king, be ordinary Joe Schmo now. Kepler in the 1600s said this. And lo and behold, you know, one of the cutting edge science projects is to develop a laser and a tiny little spaceship the size of your thumb with a huge sail attached to it, which you launch into space. The sail unfolds, the laser fires a laser beam at it. It travels gazillion times faster than we can travel at the moment. And instead of taking 20,000 years to get to the nearest star, we can get there in 20 years. And people like Kepler are alive now and are thinking like now. And look how far we've come since Kepler said that. So we've still got a lot further to go. And the beauty of it is that it's your age group that's going there. Thank you. And at this point, I've seen all the questions, which were completely blanked out during it. So I'll try and go through them. Yes, please, let's have a session on the map between Greece and Turkey. Well, sorry, I wish we could. Conrad, hi. Climate issues, I think a further flashpoint over the blue homeland will be EU-Turkey differences over whether oil should be extracted at all from the Mediterranean. Nope, they both think it should be, and the gas, as much as you can. Thank you very much. I'm not getting into the rights and wrongs of it, but if you're the Chancellor of either country, and you're trying to fund your F-35 jets, or let's say welfare payments, and someone's just found $20 billion worth of oil down there, which will fund us for the next 6 years. I'm afraid until we get real, I know the choices they'll make. The EU seems to be more convinced about climate science than Erdogan is. Yep. President of Turkey, in case anyone doesn't know. What are your thoughts on the security of the High North? The effects of global warming and Russia's intentions? That it is a area of competition, that Russia is years ahead of everyone else. It has 34 icebreakers. America has 2. It has brigades of military people up there. It mothballed its airfields and its ports when it ran out of money after the end of communism, and it's now opening them up again. So Russia's way, way ahead. And again, I'm afraid they will despoil the Arctic if they can get at the stuff that's down there. Tagoni, hi to everybody. Okay. In that case, we'll ask Charlotte. What are your thoughts on the 5th domain of warfare or cyberspace? Will your next book be on cyberspace? Well, it's to everybody. So, Charlotte? Natasha? Anyone? All right. Yeah, actually, I've got the last chapter in the new book, Parageography, is about space and about all those things and many, many other, the Artemis Accords. Basically, lots of democracies have already agreed a treaty, but they didn't agree with Russia and China, so I'm not sure how much it's worth. I think it's inevitable that there'll be competition. But, we've worked out treaties on other things. We're years behind on treaties because technology always runs ahead of law. I'll give you an example, is electric driverless cars. One of the reasons that they can't yet be rolled out is that you're going to have to program them. And you're going to have to program them that if you see a dog run out in front of you and there's 3 kids to your right, do you program the car to swerve or to hit the dog? Well, we all know you program it to hit the dog. Fine, I'm suing you for killing my dog. No, we don't have laws yet and it's the same in space. So it's going to be, it's the thing I'm most interested in. And if 2 people that I really admire who write books about geopolitics weren't working on a book about space, I think that would be it might still be. Anyway, there's a whole chapter on it. Stephanie Flanders. Isn't she the former BBC economics editor? Oh, hello.
Yes.
Hi. Now at Bloomberg, I believe. Do you think there'll be a 3rd World War? And if so, will it break out?
That is a question.
No.
It's a question from Stanley Arledge, but it is courtesy of my iPad.
Thank you. No, I don't think there'll be a 3rd World War. I think the First World War was actually a European civil war. The Second World War was a world war. No, you can't rule out a war between major powers. It doesn't have to be nuclear, which is everyone's biggest fear. Despite being madmen, they do know what they're doing. And you don't have to go nuclear, and there are ways of fighting conventional wars, and there are breaks. There are ways for there not to be a world war. And also, the interconnectivity of the globe now means there is more to lose. Now, against that is that in 1912, 13 and 14, a lot of theorists said, Germany and Britain, who were the big two competitors at the time, their industries are intertwined, they can't fight each other, and of course they were proved wrong. But I do think there is more to lose now. There are more brakes on everything. There are more international cooperation. I'm not a pessimist. You can't rule it out, but don't lose any sleep over it. I missed one. Orestes, to me, was this an auto interview? Will EU become a mix of Africa, Asia due to immigration? Partially, yeah. I mean, there's 1 billion people in Africa now. By 2060, there'll be 2 billion. That's an extra billion people, if you can do maths. Can Africa sustain an extra billion jobs in 40 years? No. Therefore, will more of them move? Yes. Where will most of them move to? North. So, yeah, you know, I think over a period of, I don't know, decades, maybe centuries, it's quite possible. I mean, it's happened before in other areas. You know, populations change. It's the history of mankind. I mean, you know, we came out of Ethiopia to begin with. Do you think another Cold War has already started? I like that. Thanks, Javi. No, but it will have done by the end of the decade. I mean, you know, these aren't exact. You can't nail it all. No, at 4:30 on January the 6th. But it will be USA, China. We are already seeing elements of it. The Huawei recently, they wanted to, the Chinese firm, which you don't move in China without the Communist Party's say so. And so they are much more tied to the state than Western firms are tied to their states. They wanted to build our 5G system. They can do it cheaper than Nokia. The UK government said yes-ish. The Americans breathed fire on the British, and the British said, well, actually, we've changed our minds. This was a signal of what's going to be happening to countries all over the world, over and over again, asked to choose. And where you make your choices shows where you are going. Briefly, about today, the Integrated Review, it was called. Britain has named China, they didn't quite use the word strategic competitor, but it was something along those lines, which lockstep with what America says now. We are sending our aircraft carrier there to the South China Sea in 2 months' time. Do we really need to do that? The Americans have got 12 aircraft carriers. We are sending a big signal by doing that. We are looking at the future, and we are hedging our bets that President Xi is wrong. President Xi thinks America is a declining power. Enough countries will realize this and go with them. Britain is saying, under its current administration, no. They're not even trying to hedge their bets, particularly. They're going with the Americans. On trade, that's a different thing. On trade, you can go with both. But there are elements, defense and security, where you will be forced to make a choice. And that is when the Cold War will really be upon us. We're in the sort of phony Cold War. They may be in a Cold War with each other, but the world isn't. But I think it's going there. ONH to everyone. Is some type of anti-satellite weapon in space feasible at all? It seems like it would be counterproductive because the resulting debris would be dangerous to everyone's satellites. Yes, it is. And yes, it would be. But I would have thought nuclear war would be dangerous to everybody. But, you know, it's hovered above our shoulders for many decades. There's already an anti-satellite weapon. As I said, the Chinese fired one last year. They put up a big satellite and the door, it was straight out of Austin Powers film, a little sort of James Bond, a little door opened and another satellite flew out of it and then it fired things. So it's already there. As for the debris, well, the plucky little Brits are inventing a nice little spaceship with a big claw that is going out there, so the Japanese, and they're clawing all the bits of debris because there's more than 8,000 of them that are capable of punching a hole in a spacecraft. We don't want that. Simon Woodruff, as we draw to a close, as well as Violetta. So stop asking questions. Do discussions on space geopolitics acknowledge physiological limitations of humans to travel in space. For instance, space flight associated neuroocular syndrome. I've no idea. No point getting to Mars, but being blind when you get there. Yeah, but we're not going to Mars as a I was going to say manned mission, as a staffed mission for at least a decade, and there'll be an awful lot of scientific discoveries there. But yes, of course, they acknowledge physiological limitations. I mean, one of the things about the International Space Station, and there's so many experiments that were done up there, was how long can your body stay there? I think was it Helen Sharp? No, she's the Brit. There's an American woman is the human who has spent the longest in space, more than a year. And you know, they're working on all that. How much can you take with you is another thing. I mean, how much water do you need for a 2-year mission? A lot. And as you're all about to have your tea, I thought I could bring up at this point that the Americans invented this brilliant thing where basically you put your urine through this filter and then you drink it again, over and over again. So that's how you take enough water to get to Mars. Violetta, as the last question. As someone who knows the Balkans so well, Dobadan, to what extent is the breaking of Yugoslavia enabling Russia to spread its dominance using Sputnik and the Chinese vaccine for political dominance in Europe? Oh yeah, hell yeah. Bit of brief history. Yugoslavia was a communist nation, but it was never in the Warsaw Pact. It was an independent communist nation. And it actually broke with Moscow, and Stalin was going to crush it. And Truman, the American president, went to its aid and flew in loads of goods and broke embargoes and stuff. And it's funny, you know, the communist Yugoslav actually always held the American quite high regard. And then along came this fella, Milosevic, and turned them into a sort of quasi-communist fascist state, and it all went horribly wrong, but Yugoslavia broke up. Now, yes, Russia is using its influence, particularly in Republika Srpska, the Bosnian Serb part of Bosnia, to keep its foothold. And it was desperately sad when the Serbs were kicked out of Kosovo, and is trying to use its influence in Serbia. The European Union, in all its ineptness in this particular example, can't even vaccinate its own citizens, and certainly couldn't give vaccines to Serbia. So Serbia went straight to Moscow and got the Sputnik vaccine. When you look at the charts now, Serbia is one of the higher rated, we've vaccinated X% of our population. And that is a huge soft power, if you like, plus for Russia, doing the same in Hungary. So, Doravece, Edina. Yeah, they're playing a blinder on that. And the Sputnik vaccine is pretty good. They're playing a blinder on it. They are shipping it out left, right, and center. The Chinese are doing the same. Theirs is not so good, not at all, but they're shipping it out left, right, and center. And I wrote about this recently because I think it's unfair just to simply say they're only doing it for power. I mean, so does Britain send foreign aid only for power? Well, it openly says it sends aid in the British interest. You know, so countries are friendly with us and do deals with us and stuff. That's not that different to what the Chinese and Russians are doing. For me, it comes down to who is giving. And if you have a dictatorial one-party state, China, which locks up 1 million of its citizens for the crime of being Uyghur, or if you have the Russian system, which poisons its own citizens and assassinates, etc., etc., I accept it is doing things for soft power reasons and is helping people, and that's just a tick. Because the most important thing for the Serbs was to get inoculated, none of this highfalutin stuff. But I do think they are doing it both for nefarious reasons as well as humanitarian reasons. But the Russians love their children too. You know, this is not, we don't have a monopoly on that. And the best one is from Orestes, who says, thank you so much for an informative and entertaining session. And there's never been a better time to be alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for a fascinating and enlightening lecture. And of course, thank you to the audience for all your brilliant questions. and Charlotte, and for making this evening so enjoyable. If you'd like to catch up on any previous talks, do copy out the link in the chat facility, and that will take you to our online video library where you can view all of the previous lectures at your leisure. Just to fill you in on a few things that are coming up, this Thursday lunchtime, we've got former Latimer History of Art teacher Robert Orme, who's giving a talk from 1 to 2 p.m. on contrasting use of symbolism in art. And this week he's looking at romantic mood symbolism. Next week we have 2 evening talks. The first is the latest tutorial on French literature, and this will be on Racine's tragedy, Britannicus, with former head Peter Winter, and that takes place from 7 to 8 p.m. next Thursday evening. Then, to conclude the week on Friday at an earlier time of 6 to 7 p.m, we have a very special evening with Andrew Knight, Chairman of Times Newspapers Limited, and Zanny Minton-Beddoes, the Editor-in-Chief of The Economist. And they will debate a range of topics related to the future of the media and will welcome any questions about anything that's going on in the world. Should you wish to join any of these events, please do just copy out and click on the forthcoming events link in the chat before you leave. So that brings us to the end of today's event. Thank you again from all of us at Latimer, and we hope to see you soon, and have a lovely evening.